What happens when one man tries to watch all of the horror films of the 1980s? Well, we're about to find out because I'm your host, Josh Spiegel, and this is the 80s Project. Well, think of this as my present to you guys. 2 episodes of the 80s Project in 1 month. And we're at episode 6 of 1983 now, and I'll say this up front. This is a weird one, because there's not really any big releases in this block. This was a stretch of smaller movies, but there's bound to be episodes like this. So let's go on in and take a peek at what the middle of 83 has to offer. This next one debuted in France on August 31st, and it actually looks like it did have a screening in Milan on May 6th, and it's the Women's Prison Massacre. However, and this is somewhat important, it was also called Emmanuelle in Prison. It starts with what kind of feels like one of those one-woman shows that people would make fun of in theater, and one of the people speaking introduces themselves as Emmanuelle, and it's Laura Gemser, who had played the character about a dozen times before this, and I'll talk more about that in a bit. They're all in some sort of women's prison because that's what the title told us, and there's a woman named Albina, and she appears to be an albino, so I'll assume that that's a nickname, or else her parents were pretty mean-spirited. Emmy has beef with the other girls, and they settle it the prison way. Arm wrestling.
Ah! Stop it! I've had enough violence!
Yeah, that back of the hand hitting the table sure was violent. Arm wrestling, the pinnacle of aggression. Like, good thing she stopped it before it spun out of control and became like thumb wrestling or something. The guards are abusive, but the warden won't do anything about it, and she tells her story, and that she was framed because she was doing a story about drug smugglers. But then, there's this group of 4 death row inmates who are being transferred, and after a failed breakout attempt, they're diverted to the women's prison, but manage to get the upper hand and take it over. They then assault and attack their way through, leading up to a violent confrontation. So, this one says that it was directed by Gilbert Roussel, and this is what's confusing. IMDb has Roussel listed as co-director with Bruno Mattei, Italian ripoff king, and he has his own IMDb pages and credits and all, but promotion for the DVD release says that Roussel was simply a pseudonym that Mattei used? Wikipedia straight up only has Mattei listed as the director and doesn't refer to Roussel anywhere. So at this point, I'm not sure if he's his own person or not. To make matters more confusing, it seems like star Laura Gemser has stated outright that it was actually directed by Claudio Fragasso, who wrote the film's script and is the infamous man behind Troll 2. It looks like it's possible that Roussel was a collective pseudonym used by Mattei and Fragasso when they worked together. And it's also said to have been shot back-to-back with the earlier film Violence in a Woman's Prison, shot on the same location, with a lot of the same actors, some even playing the same parts, but unconnected storylines. And look, there was this long-running series of films known as the Emmanuelle series that were basically softcore porn, and began in 1974 and had a number of releases, and they were quite popular. So of course, Italian ripoffs. The most known of these were the Black Emmanuelle series, all starring Gemser, but nearly all of them were unrelated to each other story-wise. And I love Mattei, and I love Fragasso, but I can't give this more than a 2.5. There's some fun and bizarre moments, but not nearly as many as you're expecting, and it's just not as much fun as their usual sleaze trash. Its horror cultural significance is just a 1.5 though, since it's not really fondly remembered, or remembered at all, and only has the names of Mattei, Fragasso, and Gemser to make it stand out. Should you watch it? Maybe. It's got a handful of over-the-top stuff that's enjoyable, but overall, there's not much to it.
Take my advice and die. I'd like to bite your nipples off.
This next one is one that appeared elsewhere in 1983. It was released in Norway, at an unknown date and just sometime in September in the UK, and it didn't get a US run until the May of 1985, and it's The Alchemist. It begins back in 1871 as a woman is out in the woods and meeting up with a strange man by a fire. Her husband isn't happy about that because that's the kind of things that husbands don't really appreciate, and he's the Warriors of the Lost World, Robert Ginty. In a scuffle, Anna is killed, and the man curses Aaron to remain an animal for eternity. It then jumps ahead to 1955, and we see a savage man attacking and killing a deer out in the woods, and then a woman in her house. And it turns out to be Aaron, so I guess that curse worked, and that old woman is his daughter, who was just a child in 1871. There's then a young woman driving, and she has a vision of Anna and a weird monster, then picks up a hitchhiker, but when Esther casts some sort of spell to try to trade her soul for Aaron's in order to fix his curse, for some reason it affects Lenora, and she's compelled to drive off the road and crashes. She's then drawn to Aaron's house where he shows off his glass statues and says that it's like alchemy, I guess so they could justify that title, and things kick off when Lenora and Cam leave. Esther is killed when she trips and impales herself, and the couple is attacked by some sort of creature in the woods. They encounter more danger from demons before coming face to face with the evil Delgado, still pining for the soul of Anna. And this was from Charles Band back in the Empire Picture days. Before he would start up Full Moon, he would add up a company called Empire, and this was the first film that they released under that umbrella. But it would expand to put out mega hits like Ghoulies, Reanimator, Troll, and a whole bunch more later on in the 80s. It was actually shot back in 1981 and was originally headed up by another unnamed director, but he was fired after 2 or 3 days of filming, and Band had to step in to finish it up. But then it just sat on a shelf until it got international distribution, and once Empire was up and running in the US, it was issued over here as well. It wasn't well received at all, and pretty soon faded into obscurity. And I can see why. I give it a 1.5 because it's super dull. This is like 20 minutes worth of movie stretched out to an hour and a half, and boy oh boy does it feel padded out. Its significance is the same since it's by Band and did get featured on some video shelves, but it's just not achieved much in the way of notoriety or recognition. Should you watch it? Easy pass. This next little number could have been featured back on June 10th, but it got a TV premiere in the US sometime in September, and it's Dance of the Dwarfs. And with a title like that, I'm ready for silly. I guess it was also called Easy Flyer, which is much less enticing. Things kick off with a prison escape, and while hiding from the authorities, he's attacked by some sort of lizard creature that rips half his face off. We then meet Evelyn, played by Deborah Raffin from God Told Me To and The Sentinel, and she's an anthropologist on the search for a missing colleague. She hires an Easy Rider to fly her in his helicopter, and they head out in his dilapidated chopper, but are forced to crash land in the jungle, where she tells him that her friend was off in search of a legendary lost tribe out there. After some walking around, they take shelter with some of the locals out there, and they're warned that there's mysterious monsters out there that they refer to as the Dwarfs. And that night, Harry tries to force himself on Evelyn because he's such a silly, wacky drunk. After a whole ton of wandering and a random encounter with some banditos, eventually they run into Mr. McDowell himself, the recently passed John Amos. And he warns them not to be around when the sun goes down. But of course, they are, and have to face off against the Dwarfs. And spoiler, they're not real dwarfs, and also they don't dance. So what the hell, movie title? This was based on a book from 1968 with that name, and it was directed by Gus Traconis, and he had previously done horror with 1978's The Evil. But I should also point out that in the 1975, he made a movie called Super Cock. But it's not what you think, it's just a comedy about cockfighting. Chickens. And what's funny is that it used the same name of the novel, but it was also called Jungle Heat and Night of the Dwarves. But a couple of countries went with the Easy Flyer title to tie into Peter Fonda's role in Easy Rider. And I'm giving this one a 1.5 as well. It reminds me of covering all those cannibal movies from 80 and 81 and all that walking around. Nothing happens for way too long, and when stuff does happen, it's just not all that thrilling. Its significance is also a 1.5 again, since this is extremely unknown, but does have Amos, Fonda, Raffin, and some cool practical monsters. Should you watch it, you can sit this dance out. Okay, let's go traveling now, and we're going to head over to Hong Kong for a film that debuted there on September 1st. And oh no, it's Devil Fetus! It begins with an auction for an antique vase that comes to life to enchant a woman into bidding on it, and it's said to make her dreams come true. As soon as she gets it home, it starts to do some funny stuff, and I have to say, based on her lounging in bed and the shape of this thing, I thought this was going to be a different kind of movie for a second. But then, yeah, I guess it is that kind of movie because a demon appears and they do the business. Her personality starts to shift, but one day her husband walks in on her and destroys the vase, which transforms him into a maggot-faced monster, and he jumps out the window. But then it turns out that Jin is pregnant, but she's then killed. However, at her funeral, her belly grows and it just bursts open, so the priests have to use a spell to seal it up. Later, though, her family is affected when the seal is broken and things start to go strange, like when they all realize they're eating a birthday cake loaded with worms, possessed dogs transferring their evil through eye lasers, and things get to the point where they seek out spiritual help. And it turns out that the devil thing's weakness is eagle's blood, which does lead to some animal harm, although it's hard to tell if it's real or not, so I guess beware of that. Then, of course, get ready for some martial arts magic and battles, and bear in mind, if you're expecting to see a bunch of attacks from a demon fetus, you're not gonna get it, because for the most part, it just possesses things and people. But this is by Hung Chun Lao, and he was mostly a cinematographer and had been working on some big films like We're Going to Eat You, but this was his directorial debut. He wouldn't do that many more films, only directing 7 in total, but continued on through the 90s in other capacities. It's pretty low budget, but I have to say there's some really over-the-top gore effects in this one that are a bit surprising and fun. It never really got an American release and mostly just circulated on the VHS bootleg market for a while, but it's recently started getting a bit more attention statewide. There was even a sequel that came out in 1984 called Devil Fetus 2: The Rape After. And this is a blast. It's a 3.5. It's just constantly throwing wild stuff at you, and the weird stream of consciousness narrative reminded me of Fulci a bit. Its HCS is just a 1 though, since it's virtually completely unknown here and only talked about in the most niche of circles. Should you watch it? Yep, adopt this fetus. A mere 1 day later, on September 2nd, back in the US, we had the general release of a film that had a handful of special screenings earlier, including one back in May of '82, but it's Mortuary. We see a guy get clubbed with a bat by his pool, and he drowns.
All right, you turkey.
That's a chicken, my man. It's David Wysocki, who we last saw in Humongous and Mazes and Monsters, and they stumble into some sort of witching ritual. But they're discovered and attacked by a man in makeup, who kills one of them.
Hey, Josh, come on. Quit fooling around.
Sorry. You're right. I'll focus. Greg meets up with his girlfriend, a Walton, and they go to school with Chet, because you're stewed, buttwad. But it turns out that Christy lives at the house with the pool from the beginning, and her mother is a lady that really hates bastards.
Bastard!
She claims that her husband's death was an accident, but Christy thinks it was murder. Meanwhile, Christopher George is too, so I also have to play this clip. And no one believes Greg's story about the occult stuff at the warehouse, and he's pretty sure Christy's mother was a part of it. And then they start to investigate what's been going on, encountering weird phenomena at home, and decide to follow around Eve and Hank, leading them to Hank's mortuary business. There, they discover that they're just trying to hold a seance to talk to the spirit of Christy's dad, and are relieved there's nothing sinister actually going on. But pretty soon, that man in the cloak is lurking around, and it's clear that something else is afoot. So this one is by Harold Avitis, and his claim to fame was handling a number of thrillers and erotic mysteries in the 70s, and even worked with a young Robert Englund in 1978 on a film called The Fifth Floor. It was given a small localized release in a number of tiny theaters in 82, but in 83 it was picked up by a larger distribution company and given a broader run. It would actually end up being a nice success, earning over $4 million at the box office, and got some more favorable than usual reviews. Sadly, it would end up being the final film released for Christopher George. Although he shot this one before he did Pieces and another action film, this would be the last one to get a release. He passed away from a heart attack just a few months later, in November. And I'm going with a 3 on this one. I like a bunch of what's happening here, and Paxton is awesome in this and seems to be having a blast. But the story's a bit all over the place, and the resolve of the story is a touch unsatisfying. Its significance is a 2.5 since it was a mild hit and was popular on the home market and has several known faces, but it's not that well known and never took off in the mainstream. Should you watch it? Yes, give this Mortuary a visit.
He's got a crush on you.
Are you jealous?
Of him?
I don't know, I feel kind of sorry for him.
On that same day, September 2nd, there was a screening in Wisconsin for a smaller film, and let's pay a visit to the Demons of Ludlow. There's a celebration in a small town, and this guy is having a hard time getting his wife to sober up enough to go, and she's gonna miss all this banjo picking, so it's her loss. The town is called Ludlow, and it's celebrating its 200th anniversary, and they're given a gift in this fancy piano. That guy from the beginning is the local preacher man, and they do a ceremonial playing of that piano. And oddly, it sounds like some sort of organ instead, like a harpsichord. And the woman's fingers are clearly not hitting the keys that are being played. When a young couple sneaks off to have sex in the barn, though, they're attacked by a glowing hand. Newswoman Deborah is on the case trying to find out more about the town's history and wants more information about that piano. And the mayor finds a way to cover up the young couple's disappearance. Turns out that the piano was in the town when it was new and belonged to the founder. And creepy stuff continues, like floating pokers, clown dolls, and things get knocked up a notch when a woman is attacked by powdered wig-wearing demons. As things continue, it's up to Deborah and the preacher to figure out what's up with that piano and how they stop it. And hey, look at that, it's another film by a notorious low-budget schlockmeister, Bill Rebane. He's already been on the project back in 1980 with Rana, Legend of Shadow Lake, but I've also covered his films in a bunch of other videos. He did The Capture of Bigfoot, Monster A Go-Go, and The Giant Spider Invasion, all of which I've had in various list videos. This one was shot in Wisconsin, where almost all of Rebane films were done, and a portion of it was filmed on the same location as the Devonsville Terror, a movie that I'll be covering in the very next episode. After getting some small theatrical screenings, mostly in Rebane's hometown, it did get a home release, and was eventually packaged in a box set of the director's works. There's not many reviews from the time that it was released and wasn't much talked about, but contemporary discussion has been somewhat favorable, calling it more evenly paced than most of Rebane's work, even if it's perhaps a little too reminiscent of The Fog. And I may be iffy with Rebane, but this is a 3.5. I had a lot of fun with it, and I liked the whole low rent vibe. Its HCS is only a 1 though, since it's never talked about and really only recently started getting some attention. Should you watch it? Yeah, stop into Ludlow and give him a visit.
It was, wasn't it, Abigail? I have tried to make you the prettiest one of them all.
1 week later, on September 9th, we're headed over to Italy for a film that screened there, although it did play at Cannes a little earlier in the year, and it's The House of the Yellow Carpet. It begins with a couple in their home, and they have a new carpet all rolled up, and it falls over, and can you guess what color that it is? They're selling it, and a strange man answers the ad to purchase it, but then just waltzes in and makes himself at home. When she presses him on why he wants to buy the carpet, he acts super creepy and claims that he killed his wife on it. He ends up kidnapping her and giving her tips on how to remove bloodstains from it, and talks about burning her body. He reveals that he was caught and confessed to the killing, and eventually talks about how yellow carpets are cursed. So like totally normal stuff, right? Things start to escalate as he holds her at knife point and starts to delve into her past while claiming that he was sent there by her husband. But she's forced to fight back. But then things go off the rails when she kills him, but right afterwards, a woman shows up saying the man is her husband. And she was meant to meet him there, and he's simply an actor. But then she wakes up and her husband is there, and it seems as if it's all just a dream. Or is she going crazy? Or are they trying to make her think she is? So, this little slice of weird is by Carlo Lazzani, and it's the first time he's appearing here on the project, but he had a pretty long career in Italy with crime thrillers. He was still directing up until the age of 91, and was even preparing for another film, but then committed suicide by jumping off of his own balcony. This film represented his first film after a lengthy break from directing, where he served as director of the Venice Arts team and decided to return in order to jump onto the horror trend. His goal was to make something like a classic giallo as opposed to the modern one, with this emphasizing tension as opposed to gore. And this is pretty interesting. I'm going to go with a 3. It's got this weird atmosphere of never knowing where it's going, and I like that, although I admit that it doesn't really end up somewhere as intriguing as it's indicating. Its significance is just a 1 though, since it's very forgotten and ignored, and doesn't feature much in the way of names. Should you watch it? Yeah, this carpet is worth unraveling.
Okay. Be careful, please. Oh, 1 moment. I'll open the door. You better lift it.
We're staying on September 9th right now and headed back to the States for a bit of anthology action with Nightmares. We begin with a police officer pulling over a young woman and then being stabbed by a mystery man. It appears to be the work of an escaped killer named William Glazier by the news, but the Sentinel decides that she really needs cigarettes and goes out against her husband's wishes. She goes to the store, and the clerk is Anthony James, who we saw last year in Wacko, but then runs out of gas. She has to stop at a service station, and Larry is working there, but Daryl and other Daryl have the night off, and he looks like he may be Glazier. Or is he? But, like I mentioned, this is an anthology, and that's just the first story. And in the second one, we have a young gun, and he's obsessed with going to the arcade because he's a video game hustler, because I guess this movie's saying that was a thing. His little friend is Billy Jane, who is officially the little brother in every other 80s movies or something, and I guess isn't a little bro here, but might as well be. And JJ's obsession is beating a game called the Bishop of Battle, which looks vaguely like Berserk. And do you remember that song, and I'm going berserk over you? It was on Pac-Man Fever. And the game is hosted by a wireframe face that talks to him, and he's the bishop. And he says there's 13 levels, but JJ can't seem to get to the final one. Moon Unit is here, and what an awesome name that Moon Unit is. Like, there's only one of them. If you search Josh Spiegel on the internet, you'll find at least 3 other guys. Like, one is a sports DJ in Chicago, another writes about Disney movies, and I'm sure there's more, but there's literally one Moon Unit Zappa. But when JJ sneaks out at night to play the bishop, he finds out that the real secret about what level 13 is. The third story is called The Benediction and has a farmer waking from a dream, and he's also a bishop, just not one of battle. He is a priest though, and he's had a loss of faith and renounces his position and heads off into the world. Not long after, a dark car attacks him on the road, and they proceed to have a sort of duel. See what I did there? But is the battle real or just in his head? The final segment is called Night of the Rat and has a family where the dad is Clark and the mom is Lambert, and the daughter is Savannah Smiles. And they've been hearing a rat in the walls and are having marital issues. But then it seems like their little rat problem might not be so little after all. And this little bunch of tales were all from Joseph Sargent, and he made the classic 1974 crime film The Taking of Pelham 1, 2, 3, but I guess is most known for a film that he was still a few years away from making, Jaws the Revenge. This one actually began life as a pilot for a TV series that was meant for NBC. However, Universal decided it wasn't going to work, and they could just make a feature film out of it instead. It was a new and original series, although there was a story going around for a while that they were segments shot for an ABC anthology called Dark Room, but were too intense for TV, but that's turned out to not be true. The computer-generated images in the film were somewhat advanced for the time period and proved to be expensive enough that they nearly bankrupted the entire project. That budget was only around $6 million, and when the film was released, it barely made that back, although it ended up getting a fair share of cable play. And it's a 3. This is alright, but I think I liked this more when I was younger. Like, the stories are just too tame and simple morality plays, and I didn't get much into it this time around. Its significance is a 2.5 since it did get a fair amount of recognition at the time and was in a ton of video stores. Plus, it featured a decent amount of recognizable faces. Should you watch it? Sure, it's got some fun going on, so it's worth a look. This block ends with a movie that really stuck with me as a kid, and it debuted on September 16th, and it's Strange Invaders. We begin in the 50s in a quiet little suburban town, and one night it appears as if some sort of creature is on the prowl, causing bright lights to appear. It then bounces ahead 25 years, and we meet Paul Lamont, whose voice we heard earlier this year in Rock and Rule, and he's a college professor teaching entomology. His ex-wife's mother has died, so she leaves their daughter with him, but then vanishes, so he heads to her hometown to try and figure out what happened to her. When he gets there, he's immediately treated weirdly by everyone in town, and I don't even know what's happening here. But his dog also vanishes. That night, he's attacked and encounters a weird alien-looking man who shoots lightning at him. But then, we see that there's a bunch of people acting oddly, and one of them straight up peels off his face, revealing a creature underneath. But no one believes Charles's story. In fact, Nurse Ratched tells him that town doesn't even exist and was wiped out by a tornado. He goes to a tabloid to ask for help and encounters Officer Lewis, and she agrees to it, but only after an alien kills Vizzini. Together, they pair up and try to figure out exactly what the aliens are doing and what's going on in Centerville. So, this movie is sort of a sequel, but also not, and it's by Michael Laughlin. I covered him previously in 1981 with a film called Strange Behavior, and this movie was considered to be the second of a trilogy of films that started with the word strange. Behavior and Invaders were both essentially updates of 50s sci-fi flicks interpreted with a horror flair, and there was an intended third entry that never made it to the screen. This was another collaboration with writer Bill Condon, who would later go on to huge acclaim and an Oscar for Gods and Monsters. It was given a budget of around $5.5 million, but the financiers wanted some script changes, paring things back to fit the funding. They also didn't want to go with Laughlin's choice for a leading man, Michael Murphy, and suggested Mel Gibson or Powers Booth, but the director went with Lamont. Unfortunately, it was a disaster at the box office, failing to draw an audience and only earning back $1.5 million, sinking the chances for a third part of the saga. Meanwhile, later on in the film, there's appearances by Michael Lerner, and it's his portion that's why this movie stuck with me, as we see his kid being abducted by the aliens and basically crushed down into a tiny sphere that calls out for him. It freaking scarred me. And I have a soft spot for this one, but I also don't think it held up that well. So I'm going with a 3. I love how it starts, and the ending is great, but it seems a touch lost in the whole middle portion. And Lamont is a bit bland as the hero. Its significance is a 2, since it did get a touch of cable runs and popularity, but it was far from a hit and never really made a dent on the genre. Should you watch it? I'd say yeah, there's some solid practical effects on display here. So there you have it. Kind of a softer list of movies here. 83 has been going so well so far, and this was kind of a stretch of movies that was not as dazzling. In fact, I think my favorite of this one is Devil Fetus, and it wasn't even that wonderful. It was just more fun than the others and more enjoyable. But let me know which of these you've seen and which of these was your favorite down below in the comments, and let me know which of these you'd now like to see. As always, you're going to want to like this video, and you're going to want to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell to get notified when new videos come up. And also, check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/movietimelines, and you can help support this channel and keep this project going. And yeah, we're going to plug along through 83. We don't have that much more left to go, and hopefully these last couple of months are stronger than this one. But we'll check it out and see what there is in store right here on the 80s Project.